Shadowed by F. E. Hughes of Carmarthen, published in the Red Dragon, the National Magazine of Wales, July 1886. Read by Bethina. A fierce gale was sweeping the valley and causing much havoc in the woods which surrounded the isolated country house, appropriately named Crag Hall. A large party had assembled for Christmastide within its hospitable walls, and on this stormy night a group of men had gathered in the smoking room, apparently untouched by any thought of retiring to rest, although 12 o'clock had long struck and the last day of the old year had dawned. The storm raged more and more fiercely. Now and again the distant shock of a falling tree sounded above the rush of the wind, while ever and anon, in spite of the massive construction of the weather-beaten mansion, it seemed to rock in the midst of the battering hurricane. "There is something strangely invigorating in the sound of a lashing tempest," remarked Captain Holt, the master of the house. "All very well when it comes to us, in comfortable, well-warmed rooms," laughed another of the smokers. "Rather different, though, when out in the teeth of it. At sea, for instance. What do you say, Murray?" "Deuced different," assented the young lieutenant thus appealed to, "but I can tell you it is something more than grand keeping one's watch far out on mid-sea on a stormy night. It's a strange feeling to have only a plank between a fellow and eternity." "We all know you are given to sentiment, Murray," said the first speaker. "Now I'll wager there is one man here to whom there is no suggestion of comfort in a stormy night, eh, Doctor?" addressing a middle-aged, cheerful-looking man who was smiling quietly at the young lieutenant's embarrassment. "I am not so sure of that," he returned, "though I own that as a rule the sound of pelting rain and howling wind at night gives me an uncomfortable sensation, and thoughts of inconvenient patients disturb me sadly. Still, it was in such weather that the queerest thing in my life happened to me." "Let's hear it, Doctor. It's just the night for a yarn. Come, Doctor, strike up," came from several voices. And after some hesitation, Dr. Price began. "When quite young, I was apprenticed to a Dr. Strong in a country town in Brecknockshire. Dr. Strong was a skilful surgeon and a clever man, but he had one great failing. He was an inveterate drunkard. He was never fit to see patients in the evening, and often much earlier. Consequently, a great deal of the practice devolved upon me, and it really meant very hard work, as many of the patients lived miles away, scattered about the country, which was particularly mountainous and wild. One night, just such one as this, we were both in the dining-room. Dr. Strong was in a very helpless condition. I, tired out, having only returned half an hour previously, drenched and cramped from a long ride. The storm raged louder and louder. The wind howled and whistled in the chimney and came shrieking round the house, and I was enjoying the meal kept warm for me when a sudden ring at the door made me shiver. A minute later the maid announced a patient in the surgery. Upon entering, I saw a tall, stoutly built farmer whom I remembered coming for medicine previously. "He doesn't look like a patient himself," was the thought that flashed across me as he stood there, straight and strong, though literally drenched with rain. "I am sorry to trouble you tonight, sir," he said in Welsh, "but I want you to come at once to see my son." Further questioning elicited the fact that this man lived 13 miles off, in a lonely district among the Black Mountains, which I knew very slightly, but sufficiently to realise that it meant very rough travelling. "But, my good fellow, surely tomorrow will do," I urged. There seemed to be no desperate hurry at all. and I will give you a bottle of medicine for the boy that will most probably set him up again in a day. For from what the father had told me of the lad's symptoms, I could only gather that he had a slight cold. So I went on, "Your boy is only ailing very slightly. And do listen," and I drew aside the heavy curtains for him to hear more plainly the beating of the storm. "It is fit neither for man nor beast to be out tonight," I said, looking with pity at the strong brown horse that had carried my visitor to the door and stood there now shivering and wretched. But the man would not be satisfied. "I am very sorry," he reiterated steadily, "but I beg you to come tonight, sir. I know it is an awful night, and sorry I am to take you out in it, but I know the boy is dying, and I implore you to come." "My good fellow, I don't need a second asking to go out anywhere and in any weather when it is necessary," I answered, "but your son is evidently only slightly ailing, and I have been out all day. I will come and see him early tomorrow." But nothing I could say had any effect. "Please come, sir," the man pleaded earnestly. So there was nothing to do but to go. I turned away with inward rebellion. There was no chance for help or advice from Dr. Strong, so I ordered my horse, hurried back to the dining room for a glass of wine, and got ready for a trying expedition. I offered the man some wine before venturing out, but he refused, and went out to hold his horse and release the drenched street boy, who earned a few coppers, hardly, in all that cold and wet. With our hats drawn well over our eyes, we started, and a nice time we had of it. The wind and rain beat furiously against us as we went on, and once or twice my panting horse stopped, as if unable to battle any further. Still, however, we plodded forward. We had to pass several fords, swollen into angry rivers by the long-continued rains. In one of them the current was so strong that there was considerable danger in breasting it, but at last our brave steeds, panting and exhausted, landed us on the other side. Presently we reached a comparatively sheltered part under a wood, where we gained a momentary rest. Hitherto we had not spoken. All our energies had been needed to wrestle with the storm, which almost took one's breath away in its furious onsets. But now my companion broke the silence. "I am thinking that you are not blessing me," he observed. "You are thinking pretty right," I answered firmly. "Still, I am not doing the other thing." And then we spoke a few words, until a sudden thought occurred to me, and I said, "You can't have told me everything you know about your son's indisposition, else you are very nervous. What made you say he was dying? To make me come out on this awful night?" I questioned. The man shook his head. "I knew nothing more about him," he said, "but I know he will die." "Some day, no doubt," I suggested moodily. "Quite soon," my companion answered gravely. "It may be tonight, it may be in a week or a fortnight." "If you know so much, can't you prophesy the exact date of his death and the cause thereof?" I suggested ironically, thinking this must be a very strange individual. "Don't laugh, sir," he returned reproachfully. "I have seen the warning." "Seen what?" I cried. "The warning," he answered quietly. "I saw my son's funeral 2 nights ago." "Good heavens!" I ejaculated. "What do you mean?" For during my stay in that neighbourhood I had heard rumours that very often warning of an approaching death was given to the family by the appearance to one of its members of a shadow funeral. I had, however, regarded the whole thing as legendary. "It's true enough," the man went on sadly. "It was 2 nights ago last Tuesday. We were all well and everything comfortable, but I was a bit sleepy and went up to bed about 9 o'clock, leaving the others downstairs. Just before I got into bed, I crossed to the window and pulled aside the blind. I must tell you, sir, that our farm is built high up and overlooks a broad stream, and a good way off are the village church and churchyard. Well, I pulled aside the blind. It had been raining during the evening, but it had cleared, and the moon was shining clearly. But there were black-looking clouds hanging about that now and then went scudding along and hid the moon. When I looked out at first, it was bright moonlight everywhere, and right below, on the road, close to our house, there was a black, moving mass. I was quite taken aback to see anything there so late at night, and looked carefully to see what it could be. And then, sir, I saw it was a lot of people dressed in mourning, and there was a hearse, and they were all moving along slowly. I knew then that a warning had come to our house, and I could not move. I saw the procession go on, and slowly and quietly, until it came to the bridge, and there was a sudden stoppage. All pressed to one spot, and there seemed to be a good deal of confusion, but I could not see what caused it. And presently the procession went on as slowly as before, until it reached the churchyard gate. At this point one of the flying clouds darkened the moon, and when it had passed away, there was nothing to be seen. Of course it seemed strange, I answered, not owning to him the turn his tale had given me. But then it was all fevered imagination. You see, you say you felt tired that night, so probably you were not very well and slightly fatigued. Perhaps you had heard of the death of some acquaintance or something of that sort. But the man answered with decision, "No, sir, I have never been thought fanciful by my worst enemy, and I had heard of no death for weeks, not even so much as an animal dying. No, sir, it was a sign." "Rubbish," I returned impatiently. "For goodness' sake, do not harbour such ideas. You will laugh over this with me one of these days, and with your son too, never fear. By the by, you have not told him any of this, I hope?" "I have told no one," the man answered with quiet dignity. "But you will judge for yourself, sir." And I saw that nothing would convince him that the shadow funeral was not a warning. We reached the farm at last, a long straggling building on a hill, and I saw the son, a boy of 14, robust in appearance, and suffering apparently from a slight cold. I ordered him to be kept warm, gave him the mixture I had prepared, and set out on my backward journey with feelings of real annoyance at being so unnecessarily disturbed. 2 days later I saw the boy again, in obedience to a pressing message from his father, and there was a great change in his condition. Internal inflammation had set in and developed so rapidly that 3 days later, exactly a week after his father had his dream or vision, call it what you will, the poor young fellow died. It startled me more than I cared to own, when a week afterwards I heard accidentally that the funeral procession, which had, of course, taken the same road as the shadow one, had actually received a stoppage on the bridge, a wheel of the hearse having come off. This fact was mentioned to me casually by a man who was present, who never had heard and never did hear the tale I have told you tonight. "Well, bless my soul, give me a Welshman for making one's blood run cold," one of the group remarked. "You've given us all the shivers, Doctor." "But seriously, Doctor," remarked the host, as he vigorously stirred up the neglected fire, "how do you explain that story?" "I don't attempt to explain it," was the unhesitating answer, and strange to say, neither did the rest of the company. That was Shadowed by F.E. Hughes of Carmarthen, probably an amateur author who sent this story into the Red Dragon magazine. The phantom funeral, or toili in Welsh, was a much feared phenomenon and very much believed in, particularly in rural districts of Wales. Jonathan Coredig Davies wrote about one in his 1911 book, Folklore of West and Mid Wales. Here's what he had to say. The toili, or phantom funeral. With the exception of corpse candle, The most prominent death portent in Mid and West Wales is the toili or spirit funeral, a kind of shadowy funeral which foretold the real one. In the very north of Cardiganshire, such apparition is known as teili, family, but throughout all other parts of the country it is called toili. Toili is also rather general in Carmarthenshire. In North Pembrokeshire, however, it is called Crevishkin. There are tales of phantom funerals all over the Diocese of St David's, and the following account of a 20th century phantom funeral in Pembrokeshire is interesting, as my informant himself was the man who witnessed the strange apparition, or a foreshadowing of a funeral, which actually took place soon afterwards. A present-day phantom funeral. A young man who lives in the Gwaun Valley between Pontvine and Fishguard informed me in the beginning of November 1905 that he had just seen a phantom or spirit funeral only a few weeks previously. A friend of his, a young porter at a railway station in the neighbourhood of Cardiff, had come home ill to his native place in Pembrokeshire, and his friend, my informant, one night sat up by his bedside all night. About 3 o'clock in the morning the patient was so seriously ill that my informant, in alarm, hurried to call the father of the poor sufferer to come to see him, as the old man lived in a small cottage close by. As soon as he went out through the door into the open air, to his great astonishment he found himself in a large crowd of people, and there was a coffin resting on some chairs, ready to be placed on the bier, and the whole scene, as it were, presented a funeral procession, ready to convey the dead to the grave. When the young man attempted to proceed on his way, the procession also proceeded, or moved in the same direction, so that he found himself still in the crowd. After going on in this manner for about 100 yards, he managed to draw one side from the crowd, and soon reached the house of his sick friend's father, and nearly fainted. 3 days after this vision, the seer's friend died, and on the day of the funeral the young man noticed that the crowd stood in front of the house, and the coffin resting on chairs exactly as he had seen in the apparition. I may add that my informant, who had seen the phantom funeral, was so terrified, even at the time when I saw him, that he was too much afraid to go out at night. It so happened that I was staying in that part of Pembrokeshire at the time, so I went to see the man myself, and a clergyman accompanied me. I hope you enjoyed this obscure story and the folklore behind it. Please remember to click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more spooky tales and Welsh history. And, as always, thank you for listening.